Tick is going to talk to us about Joyce Antler's Big Ears, Reflections on Music and Feminist Biography.
It's a pleasure to be here and to honor a dear friend and colleague. Joyce and I belong to the same biography group that's been flourishing for the last 25 to 30 years. And I'm a member, as is Sue Quinn, who you'll hear from, and Megan Marshall, and there are two other members of our group here today, Roberta Wallens, who's a historian at UMass Boston, and Fran Molino, Jewish Studies, Middle Eastern Studies at Wellesley College. So they don't necessarily have big ears, but they don't have small ears, but we're not thinking about them or thinking about Joyce's big ears. Now, in jazz, describing a person as having big ears is a serious compliment. It means being able to penetrate the surface of a jazz style or a jazz performance and hear its essence on many levels. It also means being open to many kinds of musical styles and genres of musicianship and experience. All of us here have taken the pledge this morning that gender is an important historical variable. I'm suggesting that Joyce Antler has big ears because she recognizes that music is also a historical variable outside of its field of being itself. Last spring, an opera about Walt Whitman had its premiere in Boston. Joyce said that the composer and the music captured the essence of Whitman and its meaning for American studies and American culture. No small recognition that. It wasn't just about the sound, it wasn't just about the style and the language, as my colleagues and I discussed which influences we heard from our point of view. That was another act of Joyce's which gained my gratitude. And not that long ago, she instituted or helped establish a fellowship here in music and American studies, which I think is probably one of the first in the country. Can you all hear me, or am I talking? Is this okay? It's good? Okay. Where are we? Okay. I think it has to do with Joyce's theatrical genes and her sensitivity as both an artist and a scholar. Now, I prepared a handout for your talk, my talk, and it's in your packets. So it's on the left-hand side, because this is going to be a somewhat informal talk. I'm writing a book about Ella Fitzgerald, and I think most of you here in the room have heard her, know who she is. She was a great, iconic singer of popular music and jazz in the 20th century, probably one of the great vocalists that America has produced, and known globally. Has a huge worldwide reputation, on par with probably, maybe a little bit less, than Louis Armstrong or Duke Ellington from the 20th century. So I thought I would just introduce you to some of the issues writing this book, which of course involves race and as well as gender. Okay, so look at the first three quotations. The first one is from a recent scholar and gives you a sense of the marginality of singers within the jazz tradition. Even though they're the most identifiable performers today, they are not in the literature on the same level as instrumentalists, and their acceptance is hardly as a given. Now, you have to understand the literature of jazz has primarily been written by white male journalist critics who have done yeoman service for many years in other ways. But their attitude about singers is really, actually, it's not that different from attitudes about singers in the classical world. You know, she's a dumb soprano. Yep. Okay. Anyway, I could go on about the perfidy of the textbooks that eliminate singers and give you many quotes, but I think you get the point. It's really not hard to get. It's surprising, but nevertheless. Many examples exist. Now, take a look at the next quote. The next quote is from Ella's husband, Ray Brown. He was a fabulous musician. He was a bass player who began his career in the 1940s. He was a Bach musician, and they met when Fitzgerald and Brown were on tour. I'm going to use first names too, Ella and Ray, because it's so familiar to talk about their meeting and getting married. Through this Dizzy Gillespie tour. I don't know if you're familiar with the name Dizzy Gillespie. He's a great trumpet player and the founder of, one of the founders along with Charlie Parker of the bebop movement. Okay, And here's what he said. And Ella was there when he said this because they were taking a blindfold test for a jazz magazine. They were listening to the same recordings and judging performances. He said, "I never listened to singers much until I met my wife. I didn't dig them." There it is. After listening to her every night constantly, I said to myself, something's happening. So there's the public statement and the private statement. And then we have Ella Fitzgerald saying on television, as well as in print, "I'm not a musician." Because at the time, musicians were instrumentalists, and they were in different unions from singers and actors and entertainers. So it wasn't that she was totally alienated from the notion that she was a musician, but the language separated them. She was the other, and even today singers are not in the musicians' union. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the climate, and you see the challenges here when your subject, who's one of the geniuses of the 20th century, a musician, says, "I'm not a musician." I don't have to belabor it. Okay, now here are two biographers in number 4 and 5. James Haskin is the only African-American biographer published today who's written about Ella Fitzgerald in a full-length book from 1991. He wrote a series of great figures in Black history. He wrote maybe 10 or 12 biographies. He wasn't a trained musician, but his interviews are exceptional because Black musicians talk to him in a way differently from the way they talk to white musicians, or white biographers. But he was so aggravated by the wall of secrecy that was around Ella from the office and her managers and the protection that was in place to protect her from the prying eyes of journalists interested in celebrity, that he wrote this. While there is no question as to her generosity as a performer, it is that which we should celebrate, even though we continue to wonder why the offstage Ella has never chosen to share her life with the public. That meant that he was frustrated by his inability to interview her. She was still alive in 1991 and 1989 when he started the book. She wouldn't meet with him, and his access to friends was cut off by her manager, Norman Granz. Now, number 5, Norman Granz was a catalyst in Fitzgerald's life. He's the one who moved her from being a quote, race artist, in the sense that she was a crossover primarily marketed to in Black venues, not totally, but nevertheless, mainly. He moved her from that world into the world of the Great American Songbook, where she sang with Cole Porter and Irving Berlin and George Gershwin, and most people in this audience would know her better from that world. So John McDonough, a wonderful critic in many ways, asked Norman Granz, how articulate is she about her music, her relationship, herself? And Norman said, not at all. Well, that can't really be right. I mean, maybe it's right at some levels, but clearly that can't be the whole story. All right, here's Quincy Jones, a great figure today in American pop and jazz, and his perspective is on immediately counterpoises 1 through 5. Ella is an extension of what the beginnings of jazz are all about. It came from vocals. It came from instruments trying to emulate Black vocal music, and that includes gospel, blues, as well as secular music, other kinds of secular music, popular music. And Ella took it back to where it started. You can read it. I don't have to read everything. And she's just like a human instrument. She's got ears like Dixie cup spoons, and that means she can dig into what's sweet, and they're big. Okay, now 7, 8, and 9 deal with the process. And here I need to explain a little bit about what's going on here. When you hear an improvisation from a jazz musician, and I'm using the term to include singers, what you're hearing is not an invented language, a free-flowing language from the subconscious. What you're hearing is a mixture, often, of borrowed material transformed by an artist. You're hearing quotations from other people's arrangements of the same tune. So if you're doing Body and Soul, it isn't impossible that you might reference Coleman Hawkins's great version, or if you're doing How High the Moon, and you're Sarah Vaughan, you're going to talk about, in music terms, Ella Fitzgerald's How High the Moon. There's a network of relationships. There's levels of meaning that come through the improvisations. And that's a big point for me to make today. Now, these levels of meaning operate on they depend on the ears of the listener. And you know, Mozart used to talk about Kenner und Liebhaber, the connoisseurs and the amateurs, and the need to write for both. Well, Fitzgerald really understood that because her life was invested in the audience and the largest possible meaning of that word. So she often did that. She had licks that only insiders would know, and then she made sure that the rest of us were hooked into this process by quoting recognizable material like her own A Tisket, a Tasket, or a Dizzy Gillespie tune, Oop Bop Shabam, or a tune from her husband's big hit, One Bass Hit. Now, we won't recognize all those references, but we'll recognize enough to be entertained and invested and understand the creativity that's flowing like a stream in front of us. And so I gave you a quote from a very wonderful scholar who talks about the use of borrowed material, and Ella said, I steal everything I ever heard, so Picasso said that, and so did Martha Graham. Most artists behave that way. Just don't see it all the time. And then here's Ella again. I did all the things they wanted me to, but I really got my kicks late at night when I join with the band and just sing licks and sort of become part of the band. And that's a crucial statement for a feminist biographer, because that means she wants to transcend the marginality of the singer. She wants to participate in the largest possible process of creativity and give herself a wide range of possibility that a singer couldn't have just singing one chorus in a large tune. Take some water here. Oh, sure. I forgot to put that on. Thanks very much. I'm getting over a cold that whacked me because I said it was just a cold. Okay, these are pretty obvious points, but they're interesting. And that brings me to Joyce's work, because she wrote way back in 1981 a very capacious definition of feminism as life process. It represents a single individual struggle for autonomy rather than a self-conscious political strategy for altering the social order. Now, Ella Fitzgerald's manager, Norman Granz, was a major civil rights crusader, and he used jazz as a weapon for civil rights struggles. He would never book any of his bands into venues that segregated audiences. He insisted on the highest standard of reception for his artists, and if Ella didn't get her own dressing room, and they were that she was forced in some inferior position because she was a black woman, out they went. He was an amazing, courageous man. And Fitzgerald was a different generation a little bit, and her activism, like that of Ellington's and Armstrong's, took place on a day-to-day level, going out and doing what they did. That's what it was about, and it being parts of many, many benefits. That's another issue, though. The issue for me here right now is that the life process definition of feminism is one that works for Ella Fitzgerald, because she did it all her life. And when she chose to take a song like Lady Be Good and turn it into what I'm calling a vocal jam, in which part was arrangement and part was improvisation, she made a feminist statement. It completely altered the landscape and potential for other vocalists. Okay, so now you're going to hear music, which is a good thing. And what I just want to do is to run through the quotes a little bit. How am I doing on time?
I've got about 7 more minutes.
Okay, so that's perfect. Here are the quotes that are in this arrangement. The National Emblem March from the early 1920s, and she does that because she's really saying, I'm marching into this improvisation. You're not going to necessarily hear all of these, and who does, it doesn't matter. But Dizzy Gillespie's Cool Breeze is in there. You're going to hear Oop Chop, Oop Bop Shabam, and Klukama, because that comes after a Tisket, a Tisket, a Tasket, a Tisket, a Tasket. The old Noah, Oop Bop Shabam, Klukama, it's the new one. Ray Brown is her husband and boyfriend when she's doing this. Darnell is an old standard lick that everybody does. Slam Stewart imitation. Slam Stewart was a bass player who used to take his bow and fiddle with a bow and also hum along at the same time. And so it produced this buzzy sound, and he was a friend. They were working together in 1946. So right in the middle of this improvisation, She does a slam Stewart send-up an impersonation. Then a Tisket, a Tasket, and maybe a few other hints of Hi-Ho Silver. They're going to go by. Now, the final point I want to make is that this performance comes from a live broadcast from the Howard Theater in Washington, D.C. in 1947. So there's a live audience there. It's mostly black men and women, some white jazz fans too. It's so alive. They're an electric audience, and you will hear them applaud when Fitzgerald begins to scat, because scat to them is so steeped in their tradition of signifying, commenting on everything else around you. And then you'll hear them also applaud when she does her Slam Stewart imitation, because they get the point. She doesn't really have to say it's Slam Stewart. They know what she's doing. So I'm showing you that this personal and the political and the private and the public are coming together in this improvisation. And I hope you find it as catalytic as I did when I heard it. The CD for this performance came out in 2000.
Now, where is Charity?
Where's Charity?
Charity, I'm gonna have to have you help me a little bit. I just press up. No, I press the mouse. Here it is. Okay. I'll give you a little hand here. I just told you to go one more slide. Okay. Here we go. Now I just go to the mouse and I press this thing. Just takes a few seconds.
Well, that's a wake up. Thank you very much.
Susan Quinn is currently at work on a book about Eleanor Roosevelt's love relationship with Lorena Hickok, to be published by Penguin later this year. She is the author of A Mind of Her Own, The Life of Karen Horney, Marie Curie, A Life, Human Trials, Scientists, Investors, and the Patients in the Quest for a Cure, and Furious Improvisation, How the WPA and a Cast of Thousands Made High Art Out of Desperate Times. Susan Quinn, fully engaged.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here to honor Joyce, my wonderful friend and fellow biographer. Joyce wrote a delightful book called You Never Call, You Never Write, about Jewish mothers. And at the end of her book, she tells a story as told by her daughter Lauren. It's a story about Jewish mothers. And Lauren tells her this story about the traditional Jewish mother who, when there's a snowstorm, calls her daughter to say, it's snowing outside, make sure you wear a jacket. On second thought, maybe you should wear a snowsuit. And on third thought, maybe you shouldn't go out at all. But then there's the feminist Jewish mother. And that mother calls during the snowstorm and says, I hope you don't think that's an excuse, this snowstorm, to keep you from going out to fight the patriarchy. Snowstorms happen. You have to learn how to cope with them. And also, don't think you can rely on a man to shovel the snow. If you want to shovel, do it yourself. So Joyce points out the distinction, but I see the similarity. In both instances, this mother is on the phone talking to her daughter about that snowstorm. And this is an example of what I mean when I say Joyce is fully engaged. Joyce is fully engaged with her family. It's striking that her daughter Lauren, who is a comedian, is the concluding speaker in this two-day tribute to Joyce. Joyce is fully engaged too with her fellow biographers who are up here on the podium and in the audience. If I send out an email with a question or a problem, chances are that Joyce will be one of the first to get back to me about it. I'm sure Joyce's students and colleagues have experienced this too. Joyce connects and interacts with family, with friends, with colleagues. The personal and the political are all one for her. She embraces her subjectivity, I think, in a big way. And that's not going to change in retirement, I'm sure. That's who she is. Eleanor Roosevelt, who is one of the two subjects of my book, was like that too, fully engaged. And as I'm sure you know, Eleanor was a great supporter of Brandeis and spoke and taught here toward the end of her life. And she too merged the personal and the political always. No distinctions were made. So now I want to pivot and talk to you about the subject of my current book, which is the intimate relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok, who was universally known as Hick. Eleanor, I think you know a fair amount about. Lorena Hickok, you may not know so much about. She was an AP reporter, one of the top women AP reporters, and there weren't very many, when she and Eleanor fell in love in 1932. Eleanor was about to become First Lady and not very happy about it. She established a life of her own, an independent life, and being the First Lady was really not what she wanted to do. In fact, she was in some despair because it meant going back to Washington, which had painful memories for her of Roosevelt's affair with Lucy Mercer and whole past that she didn't want to revisit. So anyway, that's when they fell in love in 1932, but what I want to talk about is how this love relationship has been treated very differently over the years. And I'm going to pivot now and talk to you about someone else, and that's a person named Patsy Costello. So Patsy Costello has lived all her 75 years in the same house on Main Street in Hyde Park. And Hyde Park, as you may know, is the home of the Roosevelts. Franklin Roosevelt's family mansion is there on the bluff high above the Hudson, and so is the Roosevelt Presidential Library, and so is Valkill, the place where Eleanor lived much of her life and received all kinds of people, world dignitaries and troubled youths and student radicals. Everybody came to Valkill, including Patsy Costello. Patsy Costello's mom was president of the Roosevelt Home Club in Hyde Park. That meant she got to go to the ice cream socials at Valkill as a young girl. And she remembers that Eleanor Roosevelt served each child a scoop of ice cream, either vanilla or chocolate. If you chose vanilla, you got strawberries. If you chose chocolate, you didn't get strawberries. Patsy liked strawberries, so she learned to choose vanilla. Patsy was vaguely aware growing up that Lorena Hickok, whose house she could see from her front porch on Main Street, had some kind of connection with Eleanor Roosevelt. And sometimes she could see them sitting out on the lawn in front of Hick's little apartment talking. Patsy had a job at the drugstore as a teenager, and she remembered Hick, who would sometimes come in for her newspaper. She remembered her as a kind of cranky, eccentric, older woman, dressed in baggy pants and sleeveless undershirts, smoking a cigarette. And she didn't give her much thought. She thought of her as the town character, and I think many did at that point.